Kia ora, everyone. Welcome. I'll get us going with the karakia and then do the introductions. So, karakia timatanga. Manakitia teine hui, manakitia teine ropu, manakitia teine wha. Tai noa ki teine kaupapa. Arahina na korero, arahina na patai. Arahina na ture nei ki a puta ai te maramatanga. Kia ora and welcome. So we're really, really fortunate to have with us today Abi Raymond for our Korero. And I'm going to quickly introduce Abi. I am Frian Wadia. I'm the founder and chair for Natina and a parent to three fabulous boys. And we've got Abi Raymond here today with us. So Abi is a neurodivergent queer counselor, arts therapist, and a neurodiversity advocate. Her area of focus is supporting autistic, ADHD, AuDHD, neurodivergent queer, and neuroqueer individuals through neurodivergent-affirming practice. So this Korero, we are going to get into conversations about the neurodiversity paradigm, reframing how we understand neurodivergence, neuro-inclusion, and neuro-normativity. So Abby's going to talk to us a bit about this. She's going to present to us as well. And Abby's always challenging the compliance mindset that often focuses on individuals changing their behavior. And advocating instead for a shift in focus towards accepting them as individuals and adapting the environment to be more accepting, accommodating, and inclusive, meeting the diverse needs of neurodivergent people in order to create that sense of safety and belonging. So we are really, really excited to have you here, Abby, and it's been years since we've actually really had these little conversations. I know we met at the, workshop recently, but we haven't really got into conversations like we used to when, you were supporting my son years ago. So I am really excited to actually hear from you today, and just have a bit more of a korero with you. So welcome and thank you for taking the time to come along and making it here today. Kia ora, welcome.
Oh, kia ora, thank you. Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this kind of korero and hui with you and everyone else that's listening. I met Freyan, gosh, was it maybe 10, 15 years ago?
15 years ago,
And I
yeah.
had the privilege, of working with your beautiful, beautiful sons. And they taught me so much about, I suppose, inclusion and how we can work in affirming ways. So, yeah, lovely to reconnect with you more recently. I'm going to share some slides now because I am neurodivergent and I really like to kind of communicate through images. So we'll do that. Are you able to see that image? Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko te rana ai rana tēnei maka te whakapaparanga mai, ko tamaki makaurau te whenua tupu, ko tamaki makaurau te kāinga, o e noho ana manga kiakia, he tangata whaikaha takatāpui kai ko Abi Raymond taku ingoa. And I use she, her pronouns. So this is my maunga, which I live next to, Mangakiakia, and it's one of my biggest kind of co-regulators. It's a place that I walk and ground and kind of connect myself in that space. Things. So yeah, this is a little bit about who I am and my kind of positionality and the kind of lenses in which I view the world. So I'm Pākehā and I identify as tangata tiriti. I'm multiply neurodivergent, so I'm AuDHD, which is the combination of autistic and ADHD. I'm also dyslexic. And I really like this term neuroqueer, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about tonight. So it's the intersection of being neurodivergent and queer. So I identify as queer and lesbian. I was assigned female at birth, so I am cisgender. And yeah, I suppose in terms of my mahi, more broadly, I identify as kind of a a diversity advocate for all types of diversity, not just neurodiversity. And yeah, I'm a counsellor and an art therapist. I do lots of supervision around kind of neuroaffirming practice. I supervise lots of neurodivergent and queer professionals, which is amazing. Um, and yeah, over the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of professional development training around neuro-affirming kind of intersectional kind of practice. I'm also a parent of two children who are probably likely neurodivergent with similar neurotypes to me. And yeah, I love e-biking. It's one of my things that regulates my nervous system. And I spend a lot of time in nature. And yeah, I suppose broadly, what my work is about is advocating for sort of intersectional neuroaffirming, queer affirming, inclusive futures and systemic change. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. I suppose these are some of the kind of core values behind my practice. I think it's really important that we put the lived experience voices at the front. For far too long, our services, our therapies have been centered on evidence-based practice, but actually a lot of that evidence and that research wasn't centered on the voices of who we're actually supporting. And so, yeah, I'm really interested in listening to lived experience research and yeah, and education, I suppose. And yeah, all of these parts, like how can we bring all of these parts to create trauma-informed, queer-affirming, neuro-affirming, culturally safe, intersectional supports and services and practices that also sort of honour the Te Reti o Waitangi. So yeah, that kind of guides my practice. And this is a little bit of a photo journey. So if you look in this top picture here, there's me in the garden. That was when I was about 4 or 5, and that was my happy place. Not too many clothes on, really, I was a real sensory seeker, so lots of kind of playing in the mud. And you can kind of see that one with me climbing on the chair. I was a kid who needed to move my body quite a lot. You see this picture with me as a ballerina that only lasted about 2 weeks because I got expelled because I wasn't very good at following the rules. So I was more of a sort of wild child free. I was better outside climbing trees. Um, but in terms of my nervous system and trauma, I still can feel the trauma in my nervous system from the first day I had at primary school. I still remember sitting in my new entrance class, and I can still remember the frustration and anger of my new entrance teacher when I wouldn't sit down and kind of listen. And I still remember being kind of sent out of that classroom. And so I wasn't diagnosed until I was 40. So back in the 80s, my challenges with sitting still and focusing and listening and probably being a little bit disruptive in the class was kind of seen as bad or challenging behavior. And that kind of continued right through my education system, as my experience with teachers who didn't really understand my brain or my needs. And the labels I got instead were things like dumb and stupid, or yeah, like I suppose disobedient or defiant. And yeah, I really struggled with learning and writing. And by the time I got to high school, I was probably getting about 3 and 6% in most of my subjects. I was probably quite close to dropping out actually, until I found this incredible woman in the middle, the one who's got her hands on her arms. And so she was a neurodivergent teacher at my high school. And so she was my first kind of neurodivergent I suppose, advocate, I suppose, or a support person. Um, and she took me under her wing in high school, and she somehow figured out that I was really creative and I was really good at photography. So quite quickly, I took photography and I started to get A's and scholarships, and I started to feel really good about myself and realized I actually could learn. And that kind of flowed on to a whole lot of other subjects where I passed high school. And she told me about her daughter, I think it was, yeah, who was an art therapist in the UK. And she was working with lots of neurodivergent young people and told me about the amazing work that she was kind of doing, which moved away from just verbal talking and was using visual, kinesthetic, sensory-based, somatic kind of ways of working. So actually, she said, why don't you go to university? So I actually went on to study for 8 years, which is something I never even thought university was accessible to me. And so she's the person that helped me realize I had value, I could learn, I had strength. And, it can just take one person like that to really see the strengths of somebody. And so, yeah, I went on and did all the art therapy training and stuff. And then I spent the last 20 years working in different NGOs and charities and government funded agencies, working with neurodivergent individuals and young people and whānau. So I've kind of had a sense of working in the community right across cultures and socioeconomic stuff. And yeah, it's been a real privilege. But what I've experienced in the last 20 years is the generational trauma of people's needs, neurodivergent needs not being understood, the lack of funding, the lack of resources. And so, yeah, then I started my own kind of business called Neuroaffirming Futures, which is a rebrand like about a year ago. And that was sort of tied into when I got diagnosed. I was formally diagnosed with ADHD and autistic traits last year. And that was quite life-changing for me because it gave me access to stimulant medication for ADHD, which completely has changed my life and my world. And I wish I had access to that right back when I was at primary school. Um, and you'll see here there's a cake, happy, amazing day. So in our whānau, when someone's diagnosed with neurodivergence, it's a celebration and we celebrate beautiful, amazing brains. And yeah, these are my two kids, Madison, who is about to turn 4, and Lucy, who is 7. Yeah, so that's a little bit
Mm.
about me.
That is absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Abby. And
Yeah.
you've obviously done so much since, years ago when you used to work with Kushru. And I have to tell you this, I have to share this with you, Abby, because, eh, you know, um, since Kushu worked with you, in that art therapy sort of, space. We actually moved on to sort of, other spaces as well. And it has never been as inclusive as you made it, you know. And Kush has always been unique in terms of what he needs, his changing, evolving sort of interests. And you were always so responsive to all of that, and you always found creative ways. And I honestly used to think it was amazing how creative you were, because I myself as a mom wasn't so creative. I knew he needed something else. I knew this wasn't working. And you always found something, found a way to, make things happen,
It
even
was
with
a real privilege to work with him. I still think of my mahi with him. But I think
yes,
it's also something like, I mean, I didn't know I was autistic then when I worked with your
yes, yes,
autistic son, but obviously I was autistic. And I think there is something special that happens when neurotypes combine. And I think there's a fundamental like understanding of those kind of needs. And yeah,
yes, yes.
but,
Because I remember even his interest, like when he went off all the arty stuff.
yeah,
You were able to use his interest in cooking and
yes.
actually get that as part of, and I honestly
Stimulating.
was absolutely amazed because I had thought, that's it, we've come to the end of this, it's not going to work anymore. And you were like, okay, let's try this and, bring stuff in and we'll start working with the cooking stuff. And it was amazing. So I must say your creativity has always amazed me.
Oh, thank
And you're
you.
right in terms of, I guess, connecting with other neurodivergent people. And this is probably why it's so important, isn't it? That peer connection and that ability to sort of, bounce off each other, connect, find patterns that probably other people might
It's
not.
like I look at neurodivergence like a cultural identity, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, when you hang out with someone who's got the similar kind of cultural experience as you, like, they
Yes, yes.
resonate more deeply.
It's very interesting you said that because I actually feel that way. Like I'm an outsider when I see my husband and Zeus, my younger one, interact because they're very similar and they're both, neurodivergent and very similar in their sort of neurodivergence. And so I always feel like the outsider when I'm listening into them, because they just connect and they just vibe off each other and yeah. So it's quite amazing. Look, you shared so much about yourself. tell me a little bit about in your lived experience, what exactly has provided you with that sense of safety, positive self-identity, and support, especially when you didn't feel valued or when you were feeling discriminated. Obviously, you've shared about, your teacher who was sort of pivotal in terms of, I guess you rebranding your identity, I would say, from that, you know, disruptive, unproductive, uncooperative, or, fidgety student to someone who was doing well and thriving and enjoying, learning. So that would have been a big shift for you. But as the years have gone on, what has really helped you when you faced, and with or without diagnosis, we all experience discrimination. So in those moments, through those experiences, what has helped you to find your sense of safety, find your sense of, that positive self-identity?
I
Um,
mean, lots of things, and it's still kind of evolving, I suppose. And for me, it was around building like communities, like, being able to connect with other. I mean, I understood my queer identity sort of more deeply before I understood my neurodivergent identity. So, like when I came out, it was around, yeah, finding safe queer communities, so other queer people, pride events, yeah,
mhm,
kind of meeting different people. And then it's the same with my neurodivergence, like being able to
mhm,
connect with other neurodivergent people, professionals,
mhm,
and yeah, finding these kind of safe places where you can authentically be who you are for all those parts of your identities,
yes,
and like our identities are intersectional, right? So it's not, I'm
yeah,
not just Abby who's autistic or Abby who is queer, like I've got multiple parts to my identities. And
yes,
sometimes and that's one of the issues with some of our services and therapists and people out there is they might only be set up just to address autism or just to be support queerness. And like there's a real lack of therapists and services that can bring all those intersections together. And like, for example, sometimes there might be queer events or queer services, but they might not be neuroaffirming or set up for neurodivergent people. They might be really overwhelming from a sensory perspective, or there might not be enough structure or predictability. And the same goes with the autistic or the services for tangata, like yeah, disabled tangata whakaaro or something like that. So yeah, I think it's yeah for us as therapists, as parents, as teachers
yeah,
is to start to look at how can we affirm everybody's like all different parts of people's identities.
yeah,
I think for me also it's been around understanding my neurodivergence, like actually yeah having the diagnosis and understanding my neurotype and all the individual needs and then being able to honor those needs has really created safety for me. I think being able to self-advocate now. So a much stronger voice around advocating if I'm feeling overwhelmed from a sensory perspective,
yeah,
or advocating if I need someone to explain something in a
yeah,
visual way, or slow down or give me time to process. I mean, I think, yeah, it's really important for me to go to be in spaces where I can unmask and be authentically who I am.
yeah,
And I think I've noticed over time my relationships are kind of changing, and a lot of my friends and my connections now are with other people who are neuroqueer, like neurodivergent and queer. And I think like the creativity, like being able to express myself or make sense of myself through drawing and visual tools,
yeah.
has been really important. My
Awesome.
kids, I think my kids has helped me make sense of who I am. And I
Yeah,
think the other part is like what gives me a lot of joy is being a part of systemic change. Like my mahi is definitely a part of helping me feel safe, but also knowing that I'm helping to educate other people to
yeah.
help them make affirming spaces for everybody. Yeah, that
That's
would be something.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's very interesting when you mentioned that bit around how services don't always cater for the intersectionality of the needs that people might have. And, that's something we've faced challenges with all our life for, my kids. We started our journey with this complex sort of space that Kushru holds, which is he's autistic. and he's also profoundly deaf, but he also has a cochlear implant.
Mm.
And, then he got the diagnosis for intellectual disability as well. And I remember even as a kid, child, toddler, preschooler, when we were looking for spaces for him, it was either catering to the deafness or catering to the autism. And I remember feeling so frustrated when people would say, oh, but we do this and we do that. And I remember feeling angry that my son didn't have a space
I
to
know.
belong. And I remember saying at one point, just sort of losing it, instead of staying calm and cool and going, yeah, 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 being really sort of gentle about it, I just went and said, I said, well, there is no space for my son to belong, is there? I said, so let's just create a space for him because he deserves a space. And I think we've got to really push services to start, widening
Really.
what they do
Yeah, we really
and
do. Like I
think about
love
that
in those
intersection.
services like that where they've like I've worked with people with like really complex intersections and needs.
Yeah,
People say, Abby, you can only work on the autism, but it's like, they might have an eating disorder and they might be experiencing mental
yeah,
health. They might be from a
yeah,
non-Pakeha kind of culture. And yeah, like then a service, and I've been in multidisciplinary meetings where it's like, oh, well, they're doing mental health and they're doing eating
yeah,
disorders and they're doing, like, as if that it's all
yeah.
these separate parts, but you can't
Yes,
address
yes,
someone's eating disorder if you don't understand their autism, and you can't address their mental health if you don't meet their autism needs and,
yeah,
honor their queer identity. Like, and it's like, it doesn't, yes, the support
absolutely.
individuals doesn't work in those like in those
Yeah.
siloed ways.
And the other sort of striking thing, issue that sort of brings, you know, to the forefront for me is that as disabled, neurodivergent, people, you start then facing discrimination not only in the big wide world, but also within the disability or neurodivergent community itself, because, that intersectionality is not sort of, recognized or catered to. And so there's so much othering that ends up happening in the spaces that are meant to actually be welcoming and supportive
That's
and,
right. Yeah.
especially sort of taking care of or supporting your needs.
And
So
that's
yeah,
the thing.
so
Like in a lot of my professional development training, I put a whole section in about intersectionality now. And yeah, it's interesting how, like, for so many professionals that actually never thought of that. So yeah.
yes, yes. Abby, tell us a little bit about, you've used all these terms about being neurodivergent, neuro-inclusion, and neuro-normativity. What are some of these other empowering sort of and inclusive identity, labels, terms that we can start using, or what you would recommend people use? And how do we understand that? Can you run us through some of them? And also,
Yeah.
most interestingly, I also want to know about the um, AUDHD. And, for you personally, what does that look like? I know because, with ADHD and with autism,
Right.
it can be quite different. And I've heard often people say, it feels like two people sitting in my head. What is that like for you? And, on a practical level, um, how do you sort of, navigate that space?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so AuDHD, I love being AuDHD. It's one of my favorite neurotypes. So yeah, it's an interesting combination. I can often feel the pull of both the autism and the ADHD pulling me in different ways. So I suppose the ADHD parts of me like spontaneity and novelty, and I get bored really easily. So I like to be like stimulated in my mind, and I
Okay.
can kind of get like that hyper focus. And yeah, like I'm quite like, I'm always fidgeting and I have a lot of movement in my body. And then the autistic parts of me are the ones, are parts that like structure and predictability and
Yeah, yeah.
routines. and I'm very sensitive to like sound and heat. So
Mhm.
it's like my ADHD is like my Ferrari part of my being, where it keeps me
Yeah.
really fast and doing lots of things. But it's like my autism is often the kind of brakes that slows me down, and I need time to recover. I need quiet time. Um, but the autistic parts, I have an incredible sense of like details. And so yeah, like I really love the combination. It's like I've got the energy and the drive and the innovation from the ADHD, but then I've also got the structure. But yeah, like sometimes it can kind of pull. Like I have to be careful because sometimes my ADHD can sort of make me do too much, which is my energy accounting with my autism. Yeah, so I kind of have to monitor that. Yeah, and obviously like the medication coming
Yes,
into
yes.
that can kind of change things. Like the more if you're ADHD and you take ADHD medication, your autistic traits can feel a bit stronger after you've been medicated, which is
Okay.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I could go on for about that for ages,
Okay.
but yeah, I love being
Wow.
ADHD. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so talk to us about some of those terms you've
Yeah,
used,
cool. I'll
neuro-inclusion,
just share some slides because I find it easier.
neuro-normativity.
Yeah,
Run us through that.
totally. Okay, let's get some on the right one. Yeah, so yeah, this idea of neuro-inclusion, right? So this is kind of just one of a definition I kind of like, but yeah, creating neuro-affirming futures is about shaping a society that honors the full intersectional diversity. Are you seeing my slides?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
yes, no.
Perfect. Yeah.
Full intersectional diversity of human minds and experiences, allowing everyone to flourish without this need to mask and conform. So I
Mhm.
suppose it's, yeah, that neuro inclusion is making these kind of environments that meet all people's neurotypes and brain types. Yeah. And so that might look like us adjusting the processes and procedures and environments and education and work and healthcare. And ultimately, it's about meeting the needs of neurodivergent people. And we need to kind of look at like dismantling sort of a lot of ableist kind of practices where we just assume that everyone's neurotypical. And yeah, looking at kind of celebrating neurodiversity as a natural, integral kind of part of human diversity. Yeah, so that's what kind of neuro-inclusion kind of means to me. Yeah, there's inclusive environments, really recognizing diversity, there's equal access, yeah, kind of engagement, inclusive policies right across the board, awareness and respecting, yeah, the different, yeah, ways that our brains are kind of wired. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you've put proactive engagement, and I think that one is so important because sometimes when people know that somebody's neurodivergent, disabled, and have different needs, and they don't quite know how to engage or interact, they kind of avoid that. And I think for our kids, it's so critical because they then lose on so much of, engagement, interaction, participation, especially, schools, adults, in sort of spaces where the adults are the role models for, all the others in terms of how do you interact, engage with this child, how do you interact, engage with, um, the student. It makes such a big difference if you have adults who are proactively engaging
Definitely.
rather than going, oh, I'm not sure, I'm unsure, so let the child just be, or let them just do what they want.
Yeah.
And like research shows, especially for our autistic children, preschoolers, that they actually get a lot less attention from teachers, in terms of positive interaction attention, because they don't always initiate the interaction. And so often it is only the negative sort of behaviors or the distressed behaviors that give attention, bring attention to the child, and the proactive
Mhm.
positive engagement interaction doesn't necessarily happen. So, while one might think, oh my gosh, this child is taking up so much time and attention of the adults, all that attention is only because of the negative or, distressed behaviors rather than the positive. So the proactive engagement needs to be there, in that positive, engaging, interacting manner rather than in response to a, negative behavior.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, I'll bring up these slides again here. So then you were asking about some of those other terms as well. So
Yes.
obviously we've got so the definition of like neurodiversity. I really like this one by Walker. So neurodiversity is the diversity of human minds, the infinite variation of neurocognitive functioning within our species. So neurodiversity is just a biological fact. So that's just accepting that yeah, different brain wirings is just a natural part of being a human. And so I
Mhm.
suppose that's the kind of the basis of kind of neuroaffirming practice is understanding because it's quite different when you look at neurodivergence. As a deficit or a disorder and something that must be
Yeah.
treated or fixed, the way we kind of respond is quite different if we just accept it as a different, like neurodivergence is just a natural part of being a human. So that's a kind of, I suppose, a fundamental kind of principle, I suppose, of neuroaffirming practice. And then we've got the term like neurotypical,
Mhm.
which talks about having a style of neurocognitive functioning that falls within the dominant like social standards. So um,
Mhm.
and how that differs from neurodivergent. And you're asking what neurodivergent kind of meant was having a mind that functions in a way that diverges significantly from what society has decided is normal. So it's a mind that kind of diverges from what's been deemed normal by society. So I really like the I identify as neurodivergent and I use it as a kind of identity descriptor. And
Mhm.
yeah, like you'll see on some of this other image on this slide, it's not necessarily a positive or negative kind of term. It's just kind of a neutral kind of term. But yeah, it's an identity, and it's not an identity that you have to pay $2,500 to a
Mhm.
psychiatrist to give you. It's a self-determined, so it's the neurodivergent is not in the DSM. You can self-diagnose, like I suppose, identify as
Yeah.
neurodivergent. Yeah, yeah, and it's quite an empowering kind of. It's a bit like how as queer people we reclaim like a word like queerness. It's sort of like I suppose it's a reclamation of an identity.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, did that kind of make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And what is neuronormativity?
Yes, let me find those slides. Oh, I just wanted
That's
to
one
share.
that I have not heard of
Ah,
before.
yeah, I'll explain it
Makes
in a
me
minute, but
curious.
I need
Yeah.
to explain this first. So often when we think of neurodivergence, sometimes we only think of autism or ADHD, but actually the term neurodivergent actually includes everything in the DSM, which is the Diagnostical Statistical Manual. So it can literally include things like trauma, PTSD, depression, anxiety, yeah, pretty much anything that you can be diagnosed with in the DSM. So it's quite a broad kind of umbrella. And I really like that because it's just anybody whose functioning is deemed different from what
Mhm.
society, so different ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So, yeah. So when we're neuroaffirming, we're affirming of all people's kind of ways of being in the world. But what did I want to show you here? What was the thing you wanted to know? Neuronormativity. I think
Neuronormativity,
I will
yes.
come out those slides. There's so many things. This is my special interest. So I could spend hours talking to you
Oh,
about
this
this.
is absolutely lovely. And it's really nice to be able to see the visuals as well. I'm
I
quite a
think
visual
I get really bored.
person.
I put the images in to keep my brain stimulated, and I
Yeah,
really
yeah.
like choosing kind of images and stuff. Yeah. So what is neuronormativity? Um, so I just wanted to acknowledge the quotes that I'm using. So I'm quoting Sunny Wise, who is an amazing multiply neurodivergent person in Australia who does a lot of writing. Maybe in the chat at the end, I'll post a link to their website. And they've got a really amazing book called We Are All Neurodiverse. Anyway, neuronormativity is these set of ideas and standards and expectations reinforced through society. So these norms center a particular way of functioning, including thinking, feeling, communicating, and behaving. And this way of functioning is seen as superior and right. So that's when we kind of assume that everybody's neurotypical and we design education systems and processes and procedures that work for neurotypical people. And
Mhm.
so that's what we call kind of neuronormativity. And so to make us help us understand it is it's like when we assume that everybody is Pakeha or white and everything
Mhm.
comes from a white Western based perspective. And it's also similar to when we assume that everybody is straight, or being straight is kind of a normal way of
Mm,
being, and then we're saying that being homosexual is abnormal. And it's the same with cis normativity. So that's when we assume that everyone fits into a gender binary to their sex assigned at birth. Um,
mm,
and so, yeah, so that's how sort of neuronormativity lines in when
yeah,
we assume that everybody is neurotypical. And so, obviously, all these layers of normativity and assumptions is harmful.
yeah.
Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so in my head, I've often thought about how societal and cultural expectations, norms can be quite rigid,
Yeah,
and they often sort of shape a lot of our thoughts, beliefs, behaviors, patterns. And they often don't allow us to be our authentic selves. And when we sort of don't necessarily um, align with a lot of those, norms and expectations, societal norms and expectations, but still go along with them to sort of fit in the box or, um,
mm,
sort of keep towing the line. Often that comes at a cost to us, and that is, trauma in the sort of, long run. And so yeah, so that sort of, this really aligns with that
yeah,
concept that you're saying that,
totally.
I
Yeah,
didn't know there was a term for it,
yeah, and yeah.
neuronormativity, but that's exactly what it is.
But it's like, those moments when you realize, gosh, I suppose you're starting to understand whether you might have maybe thought about something that's in a racist kind of way or in a homophobic
Yeah,
kind of way. So it's actually starting to understand this, like, yeah, neuronormativity when we're looking at like things from that kind of perspective.
yes, yes,
And this is a lens, like we're starting to recognize when things come from a Western perspective, but I think this is a new type of way. So when I do teaching, sometimes people have never, ever, even thought about whether that's what they've learned or what they're teaching, whether
yeah,
it's even come from a neurotypical lens. And like like I often
yes,
do trainings in schools with teachers, and like, they're often teaching in very neurotypical ways, and it's not something that they've thought about. Even therapists, like even
yes,
therapy and counselling comes from very neurotypical, neuronormative ways where we
yes,
just focus on talking and identifying people's feelings. But
yes,
actually, for neurodivergent people, like for me, expressing myself in words, I actually think in pictures and metaphors
mhm,
and images. And, many autistic people find it really hard to identify their feelings around interoception and alexithymia.
yes,
So if you just expect an autistic person to say, how do you feel, and express themselves in words, you're actually applying a neuronormative assumption in the way that you're working with
yes,
that
yes,
person. And so we actually,
yeah,
it's really important that and so part of like neuroaffirming practice is kind of rejecting neuronormativity, right? So it's like we reject neuronormativity so we can make room for all ways of people's functioning.
yes,
And yeah, and neuronormativity kind of tells us that people have deficits and disorders, but yeah, we kind of want to push back on that.
mm,
Yeah, so yeah, I found it really helpful to understand kind of neuronormativity. There's things around neuronormativity is when we assume that good learning looks like people sitting still, listening,
yes,
looking. But like, for me, if I'm learning, I'm
yeah,
fidgeting. I don't actually like looking in people's eyes, and I will
mm,
be often doing two things at once, and I'm learning, like, and
yeah,
so if we make those assumptions, yeah. So anyway,
absolutely.
neuronormativity is important to understand.
Yes, absolutely. Um, Thank you for sharing that and also the absolutely beautiful visuals. I have to ask you, are those visuals created by you?
No, they're not, but I purchased them properly off an artist from a library, but I get the sense that they're probably neurodivergent. I love their
Yes.
and I bought like a 50 or even 100 of their images, and I actually want to try and find them because it's through a library, but I want to see if I can find them on Instagram and kind of
Yeah,
connect. Yeah,
they're absolutely amazing. They are amazing.
um, Can I
Um,
share about which I haven't got to, I was going to find this slide around the intersection of like neuroqueer.
Absolutely, yes, please.
Gotta find
And
the
I
right.
want to know a bit more if you're comfortable sharing, Abby, what's your journey been? Because, parents often talk about how sometimes their children, when they're sort of trying to find their identity, right? Whether it's, within the queer world, whether it's in the neurodivergent space, they're trying to find their identity, they're trying to figure out who they are. And sometimes parents don't know quite how to sort of support that or what that entails even. So we'd love to hear from you a little about what was that like for you and how best can, someone be supported through that sort of journey of finding their own identity in a really positive way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big question. I feel like I could talk about that for a really long time, but I think what we need to do in our whānau, in our communities, in our schools is just to honour all kinds of diversity and celebrate all kinds of diversity, cultural identities, sexualities, genders, neurotypes, all the ways that people can be humans. And I think that starts right from small children, like celebrating all those diversities. It's even like with my kids, just teaching them about different there's no such things as boys' toys or girls' toys, like there's
Mm,
you know, the kind of clothes you wear don't have to be gendered.
yeah,
My daughter's primary school has just celebrated their second school's pride. And
yeah,
so, by being able to celebrate and normalize diversity right from small ages, I think it makes it okay to be diverse or divergent or and it's that what's it called? The visibility, like having
yeah.
all the different types of diversities being visible. Because like when I grew up in quite a white middle class community where I didn't even know gay was a thing. I didn't even know like all the videos, all the books, all the people in my life. I'd never seen a gay person. I didn't even know what gay was. I hadn't seen anybody whose gender expression was different.
Yeah.
So yeah, it took me a while to figure out. I didn't come out until I was 26 as gay. Um, but I also think like identities are not fixed, right? So
Yeah.
that we start to understand our like my like for a long time I thought I was straight and neurotypical, and then I realized I was queer, and then I realized that I was kind of neurodivergent, and also like my gender expression is kind of changing, like I've got short hair and I'm kind of experimenting with different ways, and that just keeps like gender is fluid. I mean, so identities are fluid as gender expression is as well, but yeah, I think it's just about acceptance, right? And affirming, yeah, things are not like binary and fixed. Yeah, I think I need to think about that in another way to be able to express it. But yeah. Anyway, can you see my slide of the
Yes.
and yeah.
Yes. Jan?
So this is an intersection I think we all need to learn more about is queerness and neurodivergence. So there's this term which is called neuroqueer, which is when these identities of being both neurodivergent and queer kind of come together. So that might be autistic and ADHD and also queer. Um, so it can be like an identity term where you describe yourself, but it can also kind of be like a function or an action. So like when we neuroqueer therapy or we neuroqueer space, it's kind of like almost like an advocacy kind of stance where we kind of push back on those societal norms around neurotypicality or neuronormativity or heteronormativity. So I really like this idea of neuroqueering kind of my therapy or my world. So I kind of like that term. But why it's important is a lot of the research is showing that quite a lot of high rates, like in autism, for example, 70% of us are not straight.
Okay.
Right, so 70%, like that's and yeah, so we're almost more likely to be queer than we are straight. And I think we've got an assumption actually that we think maybe autistic people, yeah, are just
Yeah.
assume they're neurotypical. And like when I think about how we support neurotypical people and sometimes we teach them about relationships and stuff, like do we actually teach them about queerness and gender identity and sexuality? Because I don't think we do. Um, and so, yeah, so for autistic people, we're more likely to be genderqueer. There's another
Mm.
statistic somewhere. Oh, yeah, like around gender diversity, like it's a much higher rate of gender diversity than in the neurotypical kind of population. Um,
Okay.
the same with like trans, like 4 to 6, where is it, 3 to 6 times more likely for autistic people to be trans. There's similar kind of stats in ADHD as well.
Mm.
Um, and so I think that's something we're not really thinking about or kind of considering in our practice. And one of the key points is you can't be neuroaffirming if you're not gender affirming, because there's such a high intersection of neurodivergent and queer and trans people.
Mm.
Um, yeah, like you actually have to be rainbow affirming, queer affirming if you're going to be
Mm.
practicing with neurodivergent people. Um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, so I'll stop sharing now. Yeah,
Gosh, that is such a wealth of information. It is absolutely amazing. And really, really insightful. Thank you so much. Um, Tell me something in terms of this is how we should be, neurodiversity, neuroqueer affirming. What would that look like in practice for an organization or for a classroom? So I'm talking about the practical steps that you might need to take, or whoever needs to take in that space. And obviously yours is sort of a therapy counseling sort of, space. Tell us a bit about that as well. But also, what should that look like within classrooms, or early childhood centers, educational settings? What would that look like in
yeah.
practice?
Because this is often the common question, right? It's like, what are the strategies or what do I particularly do? Like, you want the
Yeah.
actual little strategy, but where it actually starts is the mindset. It's like your mindset. And actually, I think that's the most powerful shift, right? So if you're in that kind of deficit-based medical model, behavioral kind of model, where you look at neurodivergent people as disordered or have deficiencies or defects that we need to shape and change, like that flows down to the way that you support neurodivergent people, right? But if your mindset accepts that neurodivergent people are just a natural part of human variation and diversity, and your mindset celebrates diversity, like fundamentally that's going to change the way that you show up and you have empathy for that person. So yeah, it's like it's that mindset, and we're not having that mindset where we think we need to fix or shape or change neurodivergent people to be more like neurotypical people. Like, so in neuroaffirming practice, we kind of reject that and we understand that neurodivergent people are completely fine as they are, but we need to support them and accommodate them and meet their needs. So I think that's the first thing. So it's the mindset. And then we need to celebrate diversity, like in our classrooms and our communities, just celebrate. Like if you're in a classroom, celebrating all the different ways people learn. Isn't that amazing that little Johnny expresses himself in pictures? Isn't that amazing that Sally can, she can move her body and learn at the same time? It's like celebrating all our different amazing minds. I think it's about changing the language that we use, dropping any of the deficit disordered kind of language and reframing that, it might be instead of little Johnny is impulsive and always interrupting, it might be he's got incredible energy and a passion for conversation or something, like it's reframing those as strength.
Yeah.
And I think it's like looking at behavior, like when someone is expressing their distress through a behavior that is of concern, it's like the lens in which you understand that, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's, like it's not that children don't behave badly on purpose. It's looking at what are the needs, what is that young person telling me that they need? And meeting those needs, not withdrawing attention or using consequences. I think it's also about us being flexible as teachers and parents, around the way we support and understand. I think it's also about like celebrating quirks and quirkiness and different strengths.
Yeah.
And I love I kind of this idea of letting go of like conformity, like compliance, and everybody's learning or behaving or communicating or interacting in a particular way. It's actually just accepting diversity and letting people be authentically who they are, like um yeah.
It's really interesting, as much as I've sort of in both my personal life, my professional sort of, space, sort of learned about inclusion. I advocate so much for accommodation and,
Yeah.
adaptation and sort of that acceptance. And yet I will slip back to some of those preconceived normative ways of being every now and then. And I will sort of, I'll tell Zia something like, oh, you've got to do this and you've got to do that, or, this needs to happen and that's not happening. And then, he'll come back to me with, his frustration about why, he doesn't need to do that or why bother with it. And when I don't react to it, it actually makes sense. And I actually go, oh, yeah, actually, he's got a point. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
why are we trying to push for this? Or why are we expecting this only this way?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it can be, there's nothing that says it has to be this way. I'm saying that because this is what I've taught and this is how I've grown up and this is what, I
Mm.
see everybody else around me sort of expecting and doing.
That's the neuronormativity. That's what we were just talking about, where that it's
Yes, yes.
ingrained. Yeah, yeah,
And it's the
yeah,
parenting, and I really feel that as parents, sometimes what happens is the pressures we feel about those societal expectations about how you parent or how your children behave and all of that, we inadvertently sometimes take them on and then we pass them on to our children, put the pressure and expectation on them. And I think as parents, we sometimes, have to actually stand up and say, actually, doesn't matter what the world thinks, my child's different, that's fine. They can be different and they can, be celebrated for who they are. So yeah, so I think that's one of the key things I've realized as parents. If we don't do that, we inadvertently add to the chronic stress and trauma that our kids are likely to experience.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
So
that's where we come in, right? And you've both been an incredible like an advocate for your children. As our children grow up, if we help them, that's what I'm doing with my kids, helping them understand what their needs are, what their bodies need, what their minds need, and then to start to advocate for it, And like with my daughter,
yes,
her notice when her body needs a movement break and she can say, Mummy, my body is finding it hard to sit still, I need to move, or Mummy, you're using too many words, can you explain that differently? Or
yes,
Mummy, it's too
yes,
loud, I need my noise cancelling headphones. And so
yeah,
by modeling that ourselves and helping them to advocate, like that's what
yeah,
I'm excited about. I know my children will understand their needs and their minds and their bodies and going to be really strong kind of advocates for
yeah,
themselves and their systems that aren't designed for their bodies. And they're not going to take on that negative self-concepts about they're broken or wrong or something's
yes,
wrong with
yes.
them. They're going to just be empowered.
Absolutely. Abby, can I ask you one question
Yeah.
around alexithymia?
Yeah.
I've always been really curious. I've read about it and I kind of understand it from, you know, the perspective of that sometimes people can't identify their emotions. But tell us a bit more about it. What
Yeah.
is it like for, neurodivergent people or anybody who might have alexithymia? And I'll tell you why I'm asking you this is because I've often wondered if my partner actually has alexithymia because often when I say things like, what do you think of this? How do you feel about this? And again, sort of those normative ways of, connecting and showing emotion and all of that. I sort of just draw on that because that's all I know. And so I'm learning sort of slowly, slowly in this space, that like you said, there's different ways of being, different ways of sharing emotions. And so what is alexithymia like? Like,
Yeah, I mean
who's somebody who might actually have
yeah.
alexithymia?
I mean,
Yeah,
it's a big, like you could spend a couple of hours kind of learning about it fully. And it's unique for each person, but
yeah,
alexithymia and interoception kind of work together. So, like to understand how you are feeling, you've
yeah,
got to kind of notice all the sensations in your
yes,
body, right? And so sometimes, well, for quite often, neurodivergent people find it hard to notice, your heart racing or
mm,
that sense to go to the toilet. So it's the link between sensing the sensations and then being able to pair that with a
mm,
language for expressing it. So like
yeah,
alexithymia sometimes is like around not knowing how to name or make sense of all those sensations and those feelings and not having a language for it.
mm,
But that's where the neuronormativity stuff comes in, right? When we expect people to have like a notice all these things and pair them to a particular
yes,
word. Um, but I mean, I'm an art therapist and a therapist, and I've worked with neurodivergent people for 20 years, and they do have an incredible way of expressing and understanding their feelings, but it might just not look like words. And so that's why I've always
yeah,
really loved art therapy. It's a great way of people being able to express themselves. People might express themselves through music or rhythm or drawing or movement or
mm,
their special interests. So yeah, it's just helping them find a language. I was working with a woman a while ago, and she was saying to me, "I'm autistic. I can't. I'm not very good at talking about my feelings, or I've got no way of expressing." But what I noticed in all of our conversations, she'd express herself in metaphor. She'd be saying, "Oh, Abby, today I'm like a train off the tracks," or today, and so
mm.
yeah. Um,
Amazing.
mm,
That's
mm,
fabulous. Thank you.
mm.
Okay, so gosh, I need to keep track of time, don't I? Goodness me, we are actually on our hour,
It's fine.
Abby. But look, one last question, actually, two last questions.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, as a Pakeha person,
Yeah.
what does upholding the mean for you? I know this is something that is one of your values, one of your sort of pillars that you look at upholding. Tell us a bit more about that. What does that look like for you across the spaces you inhabit, across the work you do? What does that look like?
Yeah. Um, Again, that's a big question, and it's a journey for me. It's a journey that I'm on. But yeah, for me, I suppose the work starts with myself. I'm trying, I'm sort of working on understanding my own Pakeha identity and my culture and kind of how that impacts the way I am in the world. For me, it's around understanding, yeah, like the impact of like colonization and like the privileges that are kind of that I'm on the receiving end because of that. And it's around, at the moment, I'm in a process of sort of connecting with other Pakeha through the Pakeha project. So you interviewed Rebecca and I think Louise, right? So I've just joined their Pakeha project leadership program. And yeah, it's about Pakeha, I suppose, coming together and doing their own work around their own kind of identities and thinking about like how can we be, I suppose, allies and actually create systemic change. So like, I mean, I suppose practically for me at the moment, it's been around engaging politically, and I've been filling in lots of submissions like around the treaty bill and the regulation standards bill. For me, it's around, yeah, trying to find ways to support Indigenous rights and yeah, I'm trying to build relationships, like authentic relationships with Māori. Yeah, so I mean, it's a balance for me. I'm still trying to figure it out. Like, how do I raise up Māori research and voices
Mm,
without appropriating it? I'm trying to learn Te Reo and then work on my pronunciation. I don't know. There's lots of stuff, but
yeah,
it's a beginning journey for me. But it's really amazing.
amazing.
Yeah, and ideally. One day I would really like to collaborate with a neurodivergent queer Māori person and like ideally we would facilitate and together. So I'm still kind of, I've got some relationships that are developing, but that's my goal is to be able to work in collaboration with someone who's neurodivergent and queer and Māori. Yeah.
That's fabulous. Look, you've kind of partly answered our last question, which is what are your hopes and plans for the future, and also how can people contact you, if they want to and get in touch with you. And there is a question in the chat saying, can you please share where you got the images from the library that you were talking
Oh,
about?
sure. Yeah. I will, yeah, I'll have to Google that
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah. So what was the question again?
Right,
Just
that's okay. The question was, what are your hopes and plans for the future? Yeah.
Um, well, in the near future, I'm really like next week I start on the Pakeha project, which is an amazing leadership program. So I'm really looking forward to kind of building a community who are interested in kind of systemic change around, yeah, kind of a treaty-based kind of future and stuff. So I'm really excited about that. I've got lots of trainings coming up. I'm really passionate about teaching people around neuroaffirming practice, like changing the way we support neurodivergent people. And yeah, kind of in the process of building a website that's going to be a directory website in Aotearoa where we can find neuroaffirming practitioners and neurodivergent practitioners.
Amazing.
Um, so that's just being built at the moment. So I
Yes.
want people to be able to go to a space where they know that they can find someone who's both neuroaffirming and queer affirming. And yeah, like sort of add all those intersections in there.
Yes.
So that's exciting. And yeah, just connecting with people. I'm really enjoying connecting with other neurodivergent, queer affirming kind of people. And like I'm looking forward to your conference very
Yes.
much. So yeah, all sorts of
Oh,
stuff.
that's absolutely amazing because I've often heard parents even say things like, not just for their children, but even for themselves, when they want to see a counselor, they'll say, oh, it was a waste of time because they don't kind of get
You don't get
family
it.
dynamics, or, they don't even understand, how autism or ADHD impacts our family. And so I think that would be so valuable for.
I mean, you would have related to that, like as a parent of neurodivergent people going and getting parenting advice from someone who doesn't understand what it's like to parent a neurodivergent.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's a little bit like
Yeah.
if I was Māori and I was trying to understand my Māori identity, going to a
Yeah.
Pākehā therapist, like it's the same with neurodivergence.
Yes.
I have a
Yeah.
lot of neurodivergent clients who come to me who are trying to understand their neurodivergent identity, and like they've had lots of therapy with neurotypical therapists, and they've taught them thinking skills and regulation, but like actually understanding your core kind of neurotype is, I think, to
Absolutely.
replace for neurodivergent to neurodivergent support and therapy, actually. Yeah.
Look, I absolutely loved having this conversation with you, and I love all your little nuggets, around celebrating diversity, all types of it, starting out early, at a young age, making it visible, and sort of centering the lived experience is so essential and so important. And I must say, I mean, so much of what I've learned um, of being a parent, of being an advocate, for my children has been from peers, other parents who have sort of
Yeah.
walked that journey, other disabled people, neurodivergent people who are sort of, in the same spaces as me in that advocacy space. So there's so much that we can do and we can support each other with, isn't it?
Those safe
Peer
communities, those
community. Yeah.
communities where you feel like your identities are
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
seen and understood. Like that's, yeah, it's so
And the
important.
peer support is sort of, one of the key principles of being trauma informed.
Yeah.
This is why we find safety, we find belonging, and that sense of, connection in sort of those peer communities. So they're so, so critical for all of
It's
us.
amazing. Yeah. All the connections that you have made with your organization. So yeah, thank you. And thank you for the
Oh,
invite
thank you.
tonight.
No, thank you. Look, before I close, just want to let everybody know listening, we have the Natina conference coming up on the 1st of October. There's information on our website, and we actually have Abby coming along and speaking, running a workshop. And the whole conference is going to be really directed at sort of, taking away some practical strategies to, start embedding in your own spaces. And it is sort of, catering to professionals, families, neurodivergent people themselves, so yeah, so it's a wide range of workshops that we have, and we're really excited to have this. Thank you, Abby, for today, and look forward to all the work that you're, doing and staying connected with you.
Yeah, me
All
too.
right.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody, for
you.
coming along tonight.
Yes,
Mhm.
thank you. I'll end us with a karakia and then we can hang for a little bit if people want to ask any questions, or you're welcome to leave, okay? So, karakia whakamutunga, kia whakairia te tapu kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai. Haumie hui e tai kie. Kia ora.
Good night.
Thank you.